It is the year 1372. You are 24 years old. The battlefield stinks of blood, boiling metal, and wet mud. Your sword is slick, not polished, but wet with something you stopped identifying years ago. Your hands tremble, not with fear, but with fatigue. This is your third battle in as many years. The sky overhead is low and gray, pressing down like guilt. All around, men groan, cry, and die. Your horse is gone. Your shield is cracked. But you still stand. You are a knight. But you were not born one. This is the truth of your life. Not in tales, not in song, but in scars, rituals, and silence. You were born to land, but not wealth. A minor noble family with a name, but little gold. The sword was your inheritance, and service your future. At age 7, you were sent away. A letter of thanks, a blessing from a priest, and then the cold road to a greater lord's house. You became a page, barely more than a servant in a tunic. Your hands, small and clean, would soon learn dirt, leather, and bruises. You polished armor until you could see your reflection and hated it. You learned Latin prayers by heart. You memorized which goblet was for wine and which for vinegar. You learned to bow, to bleed quietly, and to endure the laughter of squires who were once pages like you. You missed home, but you also began to forget it. Your world shrank to stone halls and whispered orders. The fire in the great hall became your son. You watched the older squires, scarred, proud, and felt a strange longing, not for their comfort, but for their armor. Sometimes, late at night, you heard men singing drunk in the great hall, rough voices full of sadness disguised as joy. You understood none of it then, but it sank into your blood. You learned to listen before you spoke, to kneel when it hurt, to nod, even when your heart screamed no. And in the corner of the stables, you made a friend, a stable boy named Alric. Poor, rough-handed, always humming. He taught you how to clean hooves, how to sneak bread from the kitchens, and how to find joy in small rebellions. One night, you both swore an oath with rusted nails and stolen wine. You'd become knights together, or die trying. At 14, you became a squire. Training was no longer ceremonial. It was brutal, physical. The wooden swords hurt more than real ones. The falls, off horses, from walls, left scars. You learned to fight in armor before you could afford your own. You learned how to aim a lance, how to clean a wound, and how to break a man's arm. Your knight, the one you served, was kind. Sometimes. Other times, he was silent, brooding, wrapped in thoughts of old battles. You saw how the chainmail changed his posture. You began to understand. The armor you dreamed of was heavy. You learned to love your sword, but also to fear it. You trained from dawn till dusk. You learned to fall, to get up, to fall again. Sometimes you cried, alone, behind the stables. No one saw. You kept your bruises to yourself, but slowly your hands stopped trembling. You began to sleep through the pain. Your voice deepened. Your legs grew stronger. You watched a boy fail his trial and return home in shame. You swore it would never be you. You also learned the games of court, the sharp glances between knights, the politics of silence and praise. You learned how a nod could mean loyalty or death. You memorized the way your lord smiled when he lied, and one winter you saved him, not in battle, but from shame, a secret you buried, still buried. Alric? He never became a knight. He was caught stealing and whipped in the courtyard. You couldn't stop it. He never looked at you again. That day, You learned that some wounds don't scar, they stay open. At 21, you knelt in sacred silence. Your sword was blessed, your oath spoken. You vowed to defend the church, protect the weak, and serve your Lord without hesitation. Your heart beat fast, not with joy, but pressure. You were a knight. The armor was fitted. It pinched in places. The sword felt heavy, but right. A feast followed. Wine flowed. Women smiled. Your name was spoken in toasts. But you knew nothing of battle. Not yet. The silence before war is sacred and short-lived. That night you didn't sleep. You lay in your chamber, staring at your sword beside the bed. Your hands were calloused, but not yet tested. You whispered your oath again, not for anyone else, but to remind yourself you still meant it. You thought of your family, of Alric, of your own reflection in polished steel. You had become what you once feared, and yet, still, the boy inside watched from behind your eyes. Your first battle was not glorious. It was mud, confusion, screaming. You struck someone hard, but don't remember their face. Men ran, others kneeled. The dead didn't look noble. They looked cold and forgotten. Your sword was dull by the end. Your armor was dented. Your horse died with its eyes open. But you survived, and that meant everything. You washed blood from your armor with trembling fingers. You didn't speak for hours. No one did. Victory was silence, a silence filled with breathing, and then orders. You learned how quickly one battle becomes the next. You began to keep a tally, not of kills, but of wounds, your own. You started to carry herbs with you. You learned how to close cuts with fire. There was no glory, but there was honor. And in that, a strange kind of peace. The years blurred into campaigns. You marched through snow, rode through forests. You sieged castles and burned towns. Sometimes they called it justice, other times vengeance. The lines blurred. You burned homes by order of your lord. You killed men who wore no crest. You saw a child cry beside a ruined chapel, her hands red with ash. But duty meant obedience. You rode beside great men and worse men. You shared tents, diseases, laughter, and fear. You grew used to sleeping in your armor, to hunger, to loss. At court, you were honored, toasted, gifted. In your tent, you stared at candlelight, thinking of names you had once known, now forgotten. The songs sung about knights grew louder, but you sang none of them. You carried letters in your chest plate, some unopened. You visited a monastery once and confessed, but lied. You buried a brother in arms and didn't speak his name again. And still, you rode. You saw kings crowned and others fall. You witnessed betrayals hidden behind blessings. You learned to speak less, to watch more. You became a knight of silence, feared more for your gaze than your blade. You lost a finger once, never spoke of it. Buried it with the man who saved your life. Your dreams turned quieter, but never left you. You are now 30. Your body is still strong but slower. Your sword is still sharp, but your gaze now lingers longer before each battle. You have lived by the code of chivalry, but you've also broken it. You've protected the innocent and killed by mistake. You've been loyal and lied to save a life. You've given mercy and withheld it. The knightly code is beautiful in verse, but jagged in life. The scrolls in the chapel speak of purity, justice, and faith. But on campaign, it's your instincts that keep you alive. And sometimes they whisper cruel things. You once refused to burn a village. You were beaten, left in the rain. You didn't apologize, but you never refused again. because you learned something in that storm. Even a knight must choose when to be silent and when to disobey. You kept the sword, but you buried the guilt. There was one winter that broke even the bravest. The war turned long and cold, rations spoiled, fingers blackened, horses fell in the snow and never rose. Men ate leather, then bark, then worse. You wrapped your sword in cloth, not to protect it, but to forget it. The snow silenced everything. No songs, no prayers, only the slow creaking of wood, the crack of frost, the wind like a ghost whispering through ruined chapels. You saw men steal, then confess. You saw a priest bless a man, then slit his throat for bread. You didn't fight that winter. You endured. That was the hardest battle. When spring came, you didn't celebrate. You just wept quietly beside a stream, your horse drinking beside you. That winter aged you more than 10 battles ever could. You never married, not for lack of chance, but war rarely leaves time for vows. Still, there was someone, a healer. She stitched your arm in a siege town, wrapped your ribs without asking your name. She spoke little, but listened deeply. You rode back 3 times to see her. Each time it felt like betrayal, to your sword, to your silence, to the vow you never truly made. One spring, you left her a ring. No words, just the ring and a pressed violet. You never returned. Some nights fear death. You feared peace, because peace forces you to remember. And you remembered her every time you wiped blood from your blade. It was not in war that you were nearly killed, but in honor. A noble accused your lord of theft. Insult was thrown, a challenge made. Your lord, old and slow, asked you to take his place. You knew the odds. The other knight was younger, faster, but his eyes were wild, unseasoned. You bowed, took your place, and for the first time, you felt tired, not weak, just done. The duel began. Steel rang like bells, sparks flew. Your arm ached with every block. He lunged wildly. You parried. He swung again. Your blade found his neck, and still, you saw the boy in his eyes. He couldn't have been 20. You knelt after, not in victory, but in mourning. The crowd cheered. You turned away. At 45, you returned to your family's land. The house was smaller than you remembered. The fields, quieter. Your sister's children ran barefoot through the orchard. Your mother, older than you imagined, held your hand and wept. You didn't speak of war. You just stayed. You taught the village boys to swing wooden swords. You sat by the fire and sharpened tools instead of blades. You grew tomatoes, watched the stars, lit candles for names you couldn't forget. Some nights, you still woke up gripping your dagger, but most nights, you slept. You never retired. Knights don't retire. They endure or fall. But on your 53rd winter, with your back bent and your hair white, you walked into a chapel and laid your sword on the altar, not as a gift, as a confession. It was chipped, the hilt worn smooth, the blade crooked from years of hidden wars. You left it there. You walked out lighter. The world kept turning. Wars raged. Squires became knights. Lords rose and fell. But your war was over, and peace, at last, no longer frightened you. You died as you lived, quietly. No ballads, no grand tomb. But sometimes in the great halls, old men speak of a knight who never boasted, never broke, never knelt to pride. They don't say your name, but they remember your silence. And sometimes, silence is enough.